Dysfunction mapping started basically just as an approach that I was using as an Agile coach, as a Scrum Master, when I was joining teams, companies to organize my thoughts. I quite quickly got to a point where I realized that I was seeing a lot of repeat patterns and the approaches were very, very similar. And so this was just a way of saying, right, given these things that I'm seeing, here are some of the missing pieces of the puzzle, right? These symptoms over here are caused by potentially these bad Scrum practices. And so here's some hypotheses that I can form to say, if I do this, this stuff over here is going to go away. So I often describe it as being like a hypothesis-driven tool to basically to solve problems, right, as an Agile practitioner.
How do you support your Scrum Masters after they have done their 2-day training course? This is a conversation I had with today's guest, Michael Lloyd. I hope you enjoy, and let's get straight into it. All right, Mr. Michael Lloyd, thank you for coming and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So you're an Agile thought provoker, management consultant and metalhead, obviously taking that from your LinkedIn profile. You're passionate about building collaborative teams who think differently about how they work. Most important question of the day, and we'll start off with it. I'm giving you £5 to spend in Poundland. What are you coming out with?
As much chocolate as I can carry is probably the answer.
Okay. Any particular brand?
Oh, anything that you can't get in New Zealand, because I've spent way too long overseas not getting access to all like my nostalgia treats.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm actually a bit of a liability when my wife takes me to Poundland nowadays, because I will just fill a basket up with like Milky Ways, and yeah, that's me done for the week. So
yeah. So on the point of being overseas, you just mentioned New Zealand. If you could just tell us a bit about how you got to the point of sitting here today.
Yeah, cool. So I guess the abridged version would be that I was not a great student in school. I dropped out after my GCSEs, not doing particularly well. Didn't really know what I was doing with my life. And my parents decided to move to New Zealand when I was 18. So kind of last minute, I just decided to join them and see what it's like. Ended up being there for 15 years. During that time, went through a bunch of different jobs, but found this kind of Agile movement and was like, yeah, that's a cool thing. I want to do that. And yeah, spent the better part of the last 7-8 years kind of helping teams, helping organizations figure out how to deliver value, what that even means. Yeah. And yeah, it's just taking me on this weird journey of the internet, LinkedIn, Agile sphere that, of course, cross paths with you.
Yeah. So what enticed you to the whole Agile movement, if you like?
So my little story I like to tell was my first tech job, right? Because I knew I wanted to be in tech of some kind. So I got a job in one of those call centers, have you tried turning it on and off again? That kind of thing. Yeah. And when I used to have to report issues to a couple of the teams building the software in that, it was a bank. There was one team that I would go to and I'd say, hey, there's this bug and you could really do with fixing it. And they'd be like, yeah, cool, give us a couple of weeks and we'll fix that. And then another team I'd go to, they'd say, oh yeah, we can look at it, but it's going to take 9 months and it's going to cost us $1 million. And so, don't hold your breath. And so that was just like bizarre to me, right? Like, why are there's such different ways of building software? And once I discovered that the reason was one of those teams was a Scrum team, I was like, oh, cool, I need to learn more about this, which quickly turned into, cool, I need to help as many people as possible to do this.
Yeah. And I suppose it's a generic question, but I think it's an important one because everyone has a different answer, including myself, and I'm sure you will too. What does agility mean to you?
Yeah, how to answer that in a short thing, right?
Take as long as you want.
So for me, it's always been about the word adaptability. I think I remember actually recently hearing Craig Larman do a talk, and he mentioned a little anecdote that when the manifesto was written, that they originally wanted to call it the Adaptable Manifesto, but because there was someone else who already had a framework using that word, they decided to go with Agile so they wouldn't give away too many sales.
All right, interesting.
So yeah, that's always kind of stuck in my brain as it's about adaptability, right? It's the ability to figure out what our customers want, try something, adapt, and then learn, right? That's the cycle. And for me, the bit that seems obvious in, when you talk to individuals, but then just seems to disappear the second you scale it up to teams and organizations, is we can't actually predict the future. So why bother trying, right? Let's just get as much value out in the shortest time frame possible, and then figure out what we can do next.
Yeah. There's so much I want to talk to you about. And that was a really great answer. I appreciate the honesty and the openness. So I'm going to get some of the more generic questions out of the way. Then I want to dive into this explosion of content that seems to have come to the forefront, if that's okay.
Yeah.
In your experience, obviously worked all over the place, where do you think organizations go wrong regarding agility? And in your opinion, What are some of the reasons behind that? I'm sure there are many, but some of them.
Yeah, so there's kind of three things that I've seen as I'm not sure if you'd call them root problems, but they're three patterns that I keep seeing over and over again. And I think so. One of those is companies that just don't want to accept that limiting work in progress is a good idea.
Yeah.
So the idea that we have to do less to do more. The next one is that getting this stuff right, although it seems intuitive, is actually really, really hard. And so you need expertise. You need people that have really shown success at helping people to deliver and get those people into the right positions, which doesn't happen enough. And then the third that kind of builds from that is that we end up favoring introduction level knowledge, 2-day certifications, entry level workshops, more than we favor people really getting in and figuring out what it looks like in a particular context or in a particular domain, which is a completely different way of thinking, but it's also a completely different way of investing money in a business, right? Which is, I think, the part that's hard for some people to get their head around. You can't just send someone on a 2-day workshop, solve all your problems. So.
Yeah. And how have you gone around sort of rectifying some of those patterns that you see?
Well, so it's kind of been two things for me. So initially it was being an Agile practitioner and having been, I think I joined the Agile movement, whatever you want to call it, at just the right time when it was very, it was somewhat new, but it was also mostly understood, right? It was reaching, I guess, what the early adopters in the adoption curve, right? And as time progressed and I saw that there were just not enough people with the skills to meet the demand for the number of people that were trying to kind of do Scrum or whatever other sort of Agile approaches, I just tried to focus in on, okay, how do I help people who can't hire a bunch of professionals to get enough structure in place to solve some problems and then adapt from there?
Yeah.
That quickly turned into, oh, hey, it's always the same, right? Like everywhere you go, it's basically the same problems. Like the domain changes and the implementation changes, but the underlying problems are almost always the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I've sort of seen this problem, at least from my perspective, growing over the last few years, I've turned it into, right, how do I create content? How do I create repeatable tools that I can give away for free, right? So you don't have to go and spend $1,500 in a workshop, and then take this away and make your little area of the world better. Because if I think enough of us do that, right, the whole thing starts to change.
Yeah, so we'll get on to that. One of the things you're working on shortly. If you're in the kitchen of agility, if you like, and you were to pick a few ingredients, I think you alluded to one already. You mentioned limiting WIP, work in progress. Don't have to just stick to that one. But what are 3 ingredients you would recommend to an organization to get the benefits from agility, Agile, etc.?
So limiting work in progress is the big one for me. I think that has over the years been the one, like if there's such a thing as a hack to get more value, right? That's the single most important one. The second for me is probably something to do with figuring out what value is in your local context, and that's kind of a broad answer, right? Because
it has to be though, doesn't it? Because we're all like, one organization will be different to another.
Exactly. So it's like the real answer usually is who knows, right? Most companies, when you ask them what value means, every single person is going to give you a different answer. And so as a company, your mission has to be to align yourself to whatever that is. And there can be disagreement over what it might be, but ultimately you need to conclude, you need to say, right, this is our value proposition, and we're going to go after delivering as much of this thing as we possibly can to as many people as we possibly can. And that usually involves a lot of challenge to the way that people are used to solving problems in businesses, right? Which is what can make it really difficult. And then the next one, which I don't even know if this counts as a third thing. It's really kind of like a 2.8.
There's no judge. Yeah, put whatever you want in.
But it's essentially who's your customer, right? Like which again, people say this a lot, and it's a conversation that does just seem to get repeated over and over again in most organizations that I go to. But it's as soon as someone's done a bunch of market research and they've written a bunch of slides and they've put some content together, then that customer becomes this abstract thing over here that engineers can talk about and UX designers can talk about, but that they never actually talk to, they never actually get into a room with.
Yeah.
The more you can do that, the better you're gonna get, right?
And without obviously exposing clients' confidentiality, blah blah blah. What are the challenges you're facing at the moment? What sector are you sort of working in or around? Like be as open as you can be.
Yeah, cool. Well, I mean, there's not really a lot I can spoil at the moment because the last year I've been focusing almost entirely on training, so I haven't really been solving any real meaty problems.
How have you found that? Like, because that's a shift from seeing your content and meeting you today in a very short time, I imagine that's been a bit of a shift, but I'm happy to be corrected.
Yeah,
that's an assumption.
No, it absolutely is, and that was kind of why I did it. So it was training, as in this idea of getting people in a room and having them focus on learning some specific thing was something I didn't get to do that often when I was real solving problems. You know, still more than the average person. You know, once a quarter you can easily get a bunch of people in a training room, but as a skill set, that was something I wanted to build. So I was like, right, I'm going to focus for a year just on training. That's the next thing.
I was just thinking back to what you said earlier about not being the best in school. What have you taken from your sort of experience of maybe you didn't get what you needed from the system, and how have you translated that into your corporate training?
Yeah, it's interesting. The thing that originally led me down this path was realizing as an adult. So I didn't know this as a kid, but I've got ADHD. I'm fairly certain I haven't been diagnosed, but that's hard to do in this country. And realizing that the way that most learning content is built is really not. It's not good for most people, actually, to be fair, but a lot of people have the ability to just sit through boring stuff and just kind of deal with it, and then maybe 10% of it will sink in, whereas I'm the person that I'll get bored before I even get to that 10% and I'll leave the room, right? So figuring out how to actually build content in a way that's interesting, that's engaging is... it's actually a fairly well-known thing now, right? There's so some of the things that I tend to lean on are training from the back of the room, liberating structures. There's other much smarter people than me have put this stuff together. And you can build really cool content actually quite easily as well, right? It's often a lot easier to build content that way because it's so learner-led. But then, taking that and I guess breaking through, like I say, the corporate training where it's, okay, we're going to sit a bunch of people down in front of a slide pack. Maybe every 2 hours we're going to have a little breakout activity. And how do you strip that away and build it back up in a way that's, no slides, no information dumps, but people talking to each other with like a bit of loose guidance. I think it's been a lot of fun for me because it's realized that while I'm the person that struggles with that traditional kind of classroom learning, that almost everyone prefers the approach that I would kind of define first. So it helps more than just me.
Yeah. You made any mistakes along the way?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think the biggest challenge I encountered was when I built some training for a team that basically just wasn't ready for this kind of collaborative learner-led approach. And I remember being in a room teaching. It was Nexus training I put together, and I built one of these games where you to demonstrate that dependencies are not a great idea. You all go and put numbers on a wall and see how quickly we can build a number line. And at one point, a couple of people on one of the tables just stopped interacting, and they were all just sat there with arms crossed. And one of them said to me, or said under his breath, but so I could hear, "What are we, children? Why are we doing this?"
Yeah, it's always I can relate to that. When you like break out the Lego or some sort of game, it's hard to get to get the audience on side all of the time.
Yeah,
and you have to. Yeah, definitely. I don't know about you, but trying to do as much research about the audience as possible, because the last thing you want to do is turn them off. And more often than not, people are up for it, but sometimes some people are just not.
To be fair, I think like I said, I took that as a learning for that was my failure. Like I hadn't just gone in on the assumption that this thing that I've done with other groups that'll just work here, and I didn't put any thought into who's the audience, who what are these people used to, and ultimately it was because I didn't help them understand why we were doing it in this way. I just assumed they were on the same page that I was, and I think that if I'd been more mindful of that, I probably could have gotten slowly to it. So I
think we've all been there. like a comedian who does a rubbish joke and the audience just falls flat.
Yeah.
So if we think of agility as like a bubble, an ecosystem, if you like, what would you advise to people? What else is there that people should focus on? What sort of content do you consume? Is there any podcasts that people would think, it doesn't really relate to Agile, but I can see where he's coming from? Like, where do you take inspiration from?
So, funnily enough, I'm not. All of the content that I consume is not really that Agile related. So, I was just saying to someone a minute ago, I spend an inordinate amount of time in a week listening to Joe Rogan, but I don't listen to a whole lot of Agile podcasts. Obviously, I've seen yours a couple of times, and there's a few that always appear on my feed that I'll watch the snippets of.
Yeah.
But I think Agile's too hard of a topic, right? If I want to hear about aliens in the Aztec, then I can sit and listen to a podcast. But if I want to really think about something, I have to talk to someone. And so I prefer to. This is why I spend so much time on LinkedIn now. I prefer to just kind of put some thoughts out, see what other people think, have them tell me why I'm wrong. And I find that to be really useful. And I think if there's a tip for any others that I could give, it's be willing to do that. Right? I think a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people about, wanting to get started on posting LinkedIn content or Medium or whatever. And often they say, well, I'm a bit afraid that people are going to judge me or they're going to not like my content. And the answer is you've got to be okay with being wrong. You got to be okay with just saying the thing that someone else is going to correct, because you learn that way.
Yeah, lovely segue, by the way. Like, where did that spark come from? Now, again, I am more than happy to be corrected, but from my perspective, you just burst on, and I could just see you on my feed, and I might have seen one or two things before, but then it was like suddenly Michael Lloyd is everywhere. Like, what was there a tipping point to that? Were you just not connected to that many people, and you've sort of, you tell me in your own words.
Yeah, so it was a very deliberate thing, actually. It was an experiment that I tried. Obviously, like most Agile practitioners, I'm a very experimental thinker, so I'm like, hey, I think maybe if I try this thing, I'll see what happens. And it was about the time that I was looking into ADHD and realizing that my brain maybe works a bit differently. And the self-reflection point I had was that I tend to be quite a productive person, like certainly relative to other people that I work with. I tend to be able to just, when I get my periods of focus, I just get stuff done, and yet I would still spend huge amounts of time in a day on YouTube or Facebook or Reddit, right? Just on completely non-related rabbit holes, because I couldn't hold my attention on one thing.
So you weren't on LinkedIn at this time, or just very
was not
passive?
On LinkedIn. Yeah, okay. I think I was using it, when I wanted to apply for a job, that like a lot of people. So I wasn't actively using LinkedIn, but I was just wasting a lot of time, I guess, on unproductive social media. And so yeah, I decided to try and experiment. I learned about ADHD. I realized a lot of the stuff I was doing to try and force myself to focus was probably never going to work. So what I needed to do was use what I call my focus gap time, right? There's bits in between, and just kind of push them towards something a bit more useful. So it was like, cool, I'm going to try posting on LinkedIn. So I'm going to do at least one post a day. Anytime I get bored, rather than opening Reddit, I'm going to go to LinkedIn and see what someone else is saying, post a comment. And it was like, yeah, let's see what happens. And within, I think it was 6 months was the time frame I last looked at. I had like 2 million impressions and 5,000 followers, and
it's been mental, crazy.
Just out of nowhere.
Use the word mental, but I apologize. But the growth has been rapid.
Yeah, and it's nice because it was never really my intention, right? I just wanted to try to feel a bit more productive, a little bit like I was wasting time. But I think the bit that's been useful for me is knowing that there are a lot of people out there that are willing to just have the conversation about the harder stuff. So not just the boring repeat sound bites that you'll often see on LinkedIn, but some of the stuff I post is not only controversial, but I don't even necessarily know that I believe it. I'm just like, hey, I've thought this thing. What do you think? Yeah. And LinkedIn, unlike other social media forms, people will engage with it rather than just getting angry at you.
And how have you found the balance? Have you had to rein yourself back in? Because it can be quite addictive, right? When you start getting that growth and that dopamine hit of people liking, commenting, defensiveness if people don't. I'm speaking for myself here, not you. How have you found that tipping point of as your wife had to go, come on, mate, you need to get off that?
Yeah. If she's watching this, she's going to be like, yeah, I told you. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things that have been a struggle for me the whole way. And so I think the first one was the just posting too much. So it very much just turned into almost like a Trumpian, I've got a thought and I'm going to share it with everyone as if my thoughts are important, right? And so I think actually you were one of the people that first messaged me, were like, hey, great content, but slow down a bit, buddy.
Yeah, I wondered if you were going to bring that up. That was definitely from a place of like with good intent, because I'd done it like not in a arsehole way, but I've been posting on there since like 2016, and I like to think by now that I've learned some valuable lessons. And yeah, like I said, the content is great. What I went through was I just ran out. Like the tank started to become empty, and I thought, well, if I'd have been more thoughtful about it, this guy is posting some really brilliant stuff, but it's going to get lost in the algorithm, and we shouldn't be subservient to the algorithm. But like, I didn't want your stuff going to waste, basically. So I wouldn't normally have done it, but I could see, I could sort of see where I'd made that sort of, not a mistake, but it was a learning from me.
Yeah. No, and I appreciated it at the time, because as soon as you said it, I was like, wow, yeah, obviously, like, right, why didn't I think of that, right? Posting 9 times a day, probably not going to be sustainable. And I think the way my brain works, I've never got a shortage of stuff that I'm willing to say and talk about. But like you say, most of it's probably not something that other people want to hear. So I need to be careful that I'm actually giving people content that's useful to them.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even say it's that. I think it's just that it was purely it'll get lost in the 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 stratosphere that is the LinkedIn environment, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's something I've had to just be more mindful of. And then the other thing I think is the challenge of, like I say, not taking it personally when people disagree, when they don't understand the point you're trying to make. That's something I've always really struggled with. Something I've learned since being on LinkedIn is one of my personal kind of trigger things is when I feel like someone's not understanding what I'm trying to say. It's not, you can disagree with me, you can think I'm a dick, you can do whatever you like, but if I feel like you've not understood me, I just have this like intrinsic need to want to like reframe it so that I at least feel like you've understood me.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I realized that if I stick to that too much, my mental health just declines, and I just can't stop thinking about things. So now I have to sort of make the case, talk to someone about something, and if I feel like they're not understanding, just kind of step away. And then that's a much, I think, healthier way to engage with social media.
Did it impact your sort of mental health, like when you were trying to figure that side out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know how much I want to bore everyone else with all my mental health challenges, but
I think it's important because there's probably someone, or potentially someone listening, watching, going, "Oh yeah, okay, I think it's an important conversation if you're willing to."
Yeah, so I'm not shy about the challenges I face. Like say ADHD, also some autistic spectrum. So what they used to call Asperger's, but it's now autism spectrum disorder. I've got anxiety and depression, underlying most of my life. So I think I said the other day that I consider myself like a walking bundle of mental health issues tied together with string. Probably slightly self-deprecating, but not entirely inaccurate. The challenge for me is the trying to balance the thing that I need in order to feel better on a day-to-day basis versus the things that I need to do to feel long-term like I'm the person that I want to be.
Yeah.
And those two things for me conflict quite a lot, because I want to be the person that's out there, that's talking to people, that's having all these great discussions. But I also struggle with the harder conversations. I struggle when, just on certain days when I can't get my thoughts straight and things don't come out. And so I just have to regularly just step back and look at my mental health and say, what mood am I in today? What can I do today? And that's why some days I'll post 5 times and some days I won't post at all.
What techniques you do to reflect that and to hold up the mirror to yourself on a daily basis? Because again, trivial to you, someone else might take something from it.
So I have like 2 things, I guess, that are really useful for me. So the first is the kind of the mental health inventory. So it's at a given moment actually reflecting on, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling. I used to just have these days where I would just be angry at everything and everyone. And I was convinced it was because everyone else was being awful today, right? Yeah. And so when you realize actually you have days where just everything seems worse, and just being able to identify that immediately just clarifies things. And then the second is a little bit of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, of the trick that I was taught that I like is whenever you find yourself saying things about yourself in your own head, is say them back in like a silly voice, like a goofy kind of voice, because often you're so harsh on yourself in a way that you wouldn't be to others. And when you frame it in that way, when you say it as if it's a Donald Duck kind of character saying, "Oh, you're such an idiot, why did you post that?" So, well, you wouldn't say that to someone else. And when you think of Donald Duck saying it, suddenly it feels as silly as it really is, and it kind of just lets you break through and be like, okay, right, that's just me today, that's just the mood I'm in.
Yeah. And in terms of the creative process, is it just fast and loose? Is it you have a thought, put it in your notes, and is it what is your creative process?
Yeah, so I'm very much a wing it kind of a guy. My brain is at any given point normally following like 10 different mental threads that I have to pull together to form a sentence. The thing that I often do is just start writing. So I'll have an idea or a thought, and I'll just write something and see what comes of it. And then, half of the time it just goes in the bin. Half of the time it seems like it might be something useful. And so now I'll try and rework it a little bit. But so I think I did about 10, 12 Medium articles last year. Almost all of them, I would say, with the exception of 2, were written basically in a single sitting. So I would get to the end and think, right, this has got something to it. Now I'll tidy it up.
Yeah.
I could probably do with putting some more structure around it, but I found that the more I try and put structure around it, the less I can just keep myself engaged. So I've just kind of tried to work within my bounds.
Yeah. And what have your what have your employer been like on this journey? Because again, from the outside perspective is, this individual has obviously got a permanent job with a potential side gig on this, potential side business. And I've been in this situation. Yeah, was there any sort of backlash or like with what you're doing? Like, because there's the reason I'm asking this is because you could be scheduling every post and batching it on the weekend. But the reader just sees you posting, at 2:00 in the afternoon whilst you should be doing something else. Yeah. So yeah, I'm interested in the.
Yeah. So honestly, no, I'm not usually batching, and so I like to be quite transparent about what I'm doing, and I happily talk it through with my employers that I've had different ones over the years, right, as I've been doing different things. My answer, even before I knew about the ADHD, even before I kind of understood exactly what I was doing, one thing I knew about myself was that I can be hyper productive in short bursts, and that those short bursts, they're so productive that they're often more productive than the other people around me. That's something that I've been able to kind of demonstrate over the years, and so most employers, they can see that and they have no problem with it. When you occasionally get into those points where people are, you shouldn't be on social media, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing X, I usually will just put a little bit of pressure back and say, so what is X? What exactly is it you're asking me to do? And what's the outcome you're looking for? Not the handle you're asking me to turn.
Yeah, it's good for them as well, really, isn't it? As long as one is doing it in the correct way, it's only people are going to go to your profile and go, oh, he or she works for them. They've obviously got some good people. Yeah, because they're giving all of this value away.
And I'm lucky because so now I work for a company called And Digital, and they're fantastic. So they more so than any company I've ever worked for, they really seem to be like culturally agile. They really understand this idea of you're not just a job. In fact, that's why we have our and titles, right? So as you mentioned, I'm a managing consultant and metalhead. So everyone at And has one of these titles, and it's a way of recognizing who we are beyond just our job, right? And so this is something that they really care about. And so I've never had to have that conversation with anyone at And. And even if I did, I would imagine that it would come from a place of genuine empathy, right? If someone came to me and said, hey, what's this stuff you're doing during the day? It would probably be because either they wanted to help or they thought I could help them, not because it was a problem. But it comes in waves as well, right? At the end of the day, sometimes I spend 9 to 5 just so embroiled in my normal day-to-day client work that I can't do the other stuff. That's fine. But because of who I am, I'm also going to spend 3 hours in the evening doing stuff that's work-related as well.
But that goes down well.
For me, it's just I do what I want, right? I genuinely make that my life's mission is I do what I want, and it sounds like a joke, but it's like if I want to do works, if I want to talk about agile stuff in the evening, if I want to not talk about agile stuff in the middle of the day because I'm burnt out, I'll just do what I want to do. And I don't know whether it's just because of the patterns I've built or whether it's because I'm lucky. But the things that I want to do are usually things that other people are willing to pay for or to be a part of. Yeah. So I don't usually have to worry about it.
So I'm going to clip that bit up about you saying I do what I want, and I'm going to email it to your wife.
Love it. Yeah, no, I actually genuinely say that to her all the time. It's a bit of an in-joke for us as well, so I love it.
Fair enough. Even I've lost my place now. So one of the we've been talking about creativity, creative outlet, the process. One of the things that's come out of that is dysfunction mapping. Would you be able to share what that is, where it came from, what it brings to the table of tools, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. So dysfunction mapping started basically just as an approach that I was using as an Agile coach, as a Scrum Master, when I was joining teams, companies to kind of organize my thoughts. Like I mentioned earlier, I quite quickly got to a point where I realized that I was seeing a lot of repeat patterns and the approaches were very, very similar. And so this was just a way of saying, right, given these things that I'm seeing, here are some of the missing pieces of the puzzle, right? These symptoms over here are caused by potentially these bad Scrum practices or, bad XP practices. And so here's some hypotheses that I can form to say, if I do this stuff over here is going to go away. So I often describe it as being like a hypothesis-driven tool to basically to solve problems, right, as an Agile practitioner. So when I realized some of these other problems in the Agile industry that I was trying to deal with, this lack of a pathway for people beyond those 2-day introductory workshops, it was obvious that, okay, cool, if I can get some tools out there that can help people actually solve problems, not just understand theory, that seems like a good thing to do. And so I created basically a loose framework for dysfunction mapping that was similar to what I had done in the past, but was also tweaked to make it a little bit more, easy for other people to pick up and use. Threw it out, and then immediately that seems to have been quite popular. So a lot of people have gotten value from it in just a few weeks since I've put like a Miro template out there.
I'll put it in the description if you've got a link to it.
Yeah, brilliant. And so like I say, it's not. If I can give like the one sentence description for it is, it's a tool to enable your coaching spidey sense to do its thing. The way I've always tried to kind of share it with people, because I do worry about people abusing it, misusing it, is it's not going to tell you how to solve problems. It's not going to give you an answer, but it's going to give you a way to organize your thoughts, come up with an idea, and then test it. And if you can test it, you can figure out if it was right or wrong, and then do the next thing. And that's how we should all be doing it, right? So,
cool. Is there anything you've changed your mind about recently, agile or otherwise, that you never thought you would?
I guess it depends on how we classify recently. So I think the big one that often lands me in a bit of hot water on the internet is my opinions on SAFe.
Okay.
So I was among the majority, or seems like a majority of Agile practitioners that love to bash SAFe. It was easy, I noticed, to get some smiles and some nods by making a joke at his expense or criticizing it for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And I will not say that I'm a massive advocate for it as a framework. I'm not saying that it's something that most people, really that many people at all, should be looking at using seriously. But I do think that the vast majority of people completely misunderstood it. And when I realized what I was doing, I was like, right, I'm going to get my certification. I'm going to teach it to other people so that I can build my knowledge and be confident in it.
Yeah.
I realized that most of my criticisms of it were not criticisms of the framework, but of the way it's used often. And I do still have a lot of those criticisms, but I guess direct them differently now. But that gives me the unfortunate position of constantly have to be the person that's, almost defending a framework that I don't necessarily love that much.
Yeah.
Because I just want people to be criticizing reality, not criticizing a misinterpretation of things. So,
anything else?
So the other interesting one for me is the working from home thing, which I guess just something I mentioned earlier is that I would never have thought a couple of years ago that my most controversial opinion would be that working together in a room with someone is the best way to get stuff done. But nowadays it does feel a little bit like that. And being a massive introvert, so when you do those tests, where are you on the scale? I get 98% introvert. I'm someone who is massively drained by talking to people. I need time alone to recharge. I was convinced when kind of COVID happened and working from home became the norm that I was going to love it. So this is great, right? I can just get my stuff done. I can talk to people when I want to. I never have to worry about people interrupting me. And then my mental health took a dive. I just did not do well through lockdown.
Were you back in the UK then?
Back in New Zealand, that was.
Oh, okay. So totally different experience.
Yeah, very, very different. And obviously we had. So it was weird because our lockdowns were harsher, but then we had big gaps in between, and so it was a bit different. But I had this moment where, so not only did my mental health decline because I wasn't getting interaction with people, but I was like beating myself up about it. Because I was an introvert, I was like, well, I'm the person who's supposed to be okay with this, right? I'm the one that should adapt to this. And then eventually I realized, well, the problem is because I'm such an introvert, I don't have any other social relationships, or I don't really go out and do things on the weekends. I don't, go to parties. All of my social interaction comes from talking to people about the stuff that I'm passionate about, which is work, unfortunately. So yeah, I kind of had to reassess, and now I've kind of just taken the stance of, everyone's different. We all have different ways of working, but at least for some people, it is going to be better to work together co-located. And I think my opinion is, unpopular, but I think that's true for most people. I would say 90% of people are going to be more effective when they're actually in a room with other real people. And maybe that position will change again when I see some more data. But for now, that's where I sit.
Fair enough. What's coming up for you? Are you going to obviously continue with the LinkedIn content, I imagine? Are you dipping your toe into like the speaking engagements? Like what's on the road?
Yeah. So I've got sort of big plans for 2023. We'll see how much of it pans out, but I really want to get some more of my certifications just to kind of build a bit more credibility in the industry. That I do know what I'm talking about, and then I want to kind of use that as a jumping off point to start putting out some more of these tools, some more of this free training as I guess a learning pathway for Agile practitioners, not just Scrum, not just SAFe, nothing that's framework specific, just ways that you can incrementally solve problems, and dysfunction mapping is one of those. I've got other tools that I'm planning to put together. I will talk anywhere that anyone will have me, right? Like I'm actually terrified of public speaking, but that's another one of those things that I've just been putting myself, in the situation and getting better at it. And really, I'm hoping that by the end of the year, I can be in a position where there are enough people, I guess, willing to listen that I can maybe start to change the tide of the conversation, because I do worry a little bit that the Scrum Agile world is heading for a cliff, that if we don't kind of reverse course in some way, that people are going to joke about Agile the way they currently joke about Waterfall. And I don't want that world to happen.
What makes you say that?
So there you go. There's another controversial one, right?
What's pushing this way of thinking towards that cliff in your mind?
So I think it comes down to a lot of the things we talked about earlier, right? So when we think about like where we are in that adoption curve, and that there used to be a small demand for Agile practitioners, and now there's a very, very large demand for Agile practitioners because everyone wants to be Agile by default. And the problem is a lot of those people are not doing it for the right reasons, right? They're not necessarily people who are passionate about this. They just kind of see the writing on the wall. This is the way we have to run our projects now. And so that creates some challenges. But then because that explosion of demand for people in these sorts of roles can't actually be met by people that are, appropriately not just trained but passionate, you end up having, all this dysfunction starts to bubble up. And then secondarily, when you have, the people who are writing the job descriptions and doing the interviews and the hiring panels are themselves not Agile experts, or at least, fairly knowledgeable of it, you end up with the wrong people in the wrong positions. And that all then is just compounded by this problem of the 2-day workshop factory of, and I know a lot of people that run, Agile certification programs. I'm not in any way bashing people who do that, because it is an important thing that we have to do, but we have to do more, right? Like you have to support the knowledge of your practitioners and the growth of your practitioners beyond just the entry level. And if you don't have something else in place, you end up with a lot of people who say they're Agile, say they are a Scrum Master or an Agile coach, but don't really have the experience to back it up, don't understand the basics. I mean, I've lost count of the number of Scrum Masters that I've interviewed, and this is one of my questions. Whenever I'm interviewing a Scrum Master, I always ask the question, imaginary scenario, you're at a daily Scrum and it overruns the 50-minute time box, and then it does it again the next day, and it does it again the next day. What do you do as a Scrum Master? And so many people, the first answer they give is something along the lines of, I would ring a bell and stop the daily Scrum at 50 minutes, or I'd introduce a talking stick. It's mechanical. It's I'm going to do a thing to make it be under the time box, because they've kind of missed that we have to step back and figure out, well, what's that a symptom of, right? Why are the team not collaborating enough throughout the day that they feel the need to spend a huge amount of time in the daily Scrum talking about things? And I know I've kind of gone down a bit of a technical rabbit hole there, but I guess the point I'm making is, as an industry, if we don't hold ourselves to account, if we don't hold a minimum standard that we expect from our practitioners, we're going to create more problems than we solve. And I think that's what we're seeing with mass layoffs at the moment in a lot of Agile sectors, with a lot of traditional project management roles that we thought had started to go away suddenly rearing their heads again. I think it's because people are looking at it and thinking, oh no, that was a bit of a failed experiment. And I don't think that's the majority yet. I think it's a small minority, but I think it's going in a direction that we need to be very, very careful that we don't, let it run away.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced like a layoff like that? Because I haven't, so I can't speak to it.
Yeah. So I was, I'm going to name them. Why not? I was at a company called Flux Federation back in New Zealand.
Oh, they won't be watching this.
They definitely don't watch Agile podcasts, I can tell you that much. So I was actually hired as a Scrum Master, and on day 3 of in the role, they announced essentially that they were rolling back everything Agile. So they had a new exec in. So it was getting rid of all the Scrum Masters, getting rid of all the product owners. We're going to put team leads back in place. We're going to put project managers back in place. It's basically going waterfall. They had a couple of people brought in to kind of try and smooth over the edges, but obviously didn't go down well. I was among the people that was laid off as a Scrum Master, but there was a whole load of weirdness around that too.
I'm not surprised, because someone that decision must have been made as you were going through the recruitment process.
I was pretty upset at the time, right? Because that was exactly it. I knew that I was offered the job at a time when there were people that knew this was coming, so that frustrated me. And so when they then also changed their mind at the last minute and said, actually, no, you're an Agile coach now. You just don't have a team. You don't have any authority, and you're not allowed to talk to any of the leadership. So
helpful.
I hung around at that place actually for nearly 6 months in the end before, along with I think 80% of the workforce eventually left. So yeah, I've seen that firsthand.
What did you do? How did you what for those people? Like what advice or what guidance would you be able to give them?
So unfortunately, and I can only speak from my one specific experience, but I think I made the mistake of trying to hang on and solve that problem. I thought, right, if they want to keep you around and they don't understand what an agile coach is, but they at least are going to give you the job title, you can maybe try and make a difference, right? You've got a foot in the door. And I realized that if there isn't buy-in at the senior leadership level to actually work in a collaborative, led by the practitioners kind of a way, then it's just going to be an uphill battle. I think we do have to be willing to work in places where it's hard. Like we can't just always be drawn to that agile utopia where everyone's already working in a highly collaborative way. We do need to go into the public sector and the big businesses and the banks and the places where they have bigger problems to solve. But it should always be with some kind of level of leadership support. And if you're not seeing any level of leadership support, spend a little bit of time trying to get it right. That's worth the effort, but don't break your back. Don't make it your personal mission, because you will just drive yourself into the ground and still not change anything.
Is there anything else on your mind? Observations, topics that are causing you irritability? I don't even know if that's a word, but causing you concern at the moment?
Yeah, I guess. There's always something irritating me. Unfortunately, that's just the kind of old man I am. I think the only other thing that's been on my mind a lot in the last couple of weeks in particular is how do we as practitioners get better at holding the line between pragmatism and I guess evangelism?
Okay.
Because I'm a bit of a contrarian, right? So I'm often going to be kind of pitting both sides against each other on anything, but I've noticed that Agile practitioners fall often into one of two camps, right? They're either incredibly evangelist and they're only willing to accept some version of the future that aligns with a really particular approach, whether it's perfect Scrum or whether it's the Agile Manifesto values being lived perfectly. Whereas other people are endlessly pragmatic to the point that they end up essentially just enabling minor changes in words and in language and not really seeing anything good come of it. Yeah. Sorry, didn't figure out how to put that on mute beforehand.
It's all right.
So yeah, I think figuring out where that line is something that a lot of people have struggled with, and my answer, and this is, I guess I'm putting it into the universe for other people to tell me if they think I'm right or wrong, is you should always be an evangelist with regards to principles, but you should always be a pragmatist with regard to practice, which is to say, directionally, we know where we want to go, right? We know that we want people and interactions over processes and tools. We know that we want limited work in progress, or we know that we want psychological safety. We're not going to compromise on the fact that that's the future that we want to live in, but we have to understand that it's a small step to get there. So practically, the things that we're going to do, they might be things that are not perfect. They might be things that we don't want in the long term.
Yeah.
But as long as they help step us towards that goal, then they're worth doing. And I think if more practitioners could kind of find that balance, we'd start seeing better results.
I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Been an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, cheers, man.
And
yeah, it was good to see you. Thanks
for coming. Thanks for listening to this month's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, please let us know in the comments, and also tell your mates, like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.